Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another wonderful installment of the tutorials that I bring. And I guess that would also include the um, lectures as well. We just finished writing our final draft of the method section, and hopefully I will get those graded as soon as possible. I realize that this is definitely a class that would be better off if we were in person, but we can't do it, so I'm trying to do it the best way that I can. So we started off by putting our feet to the fire and writing a method section based on what would normally be something we did in class as far as the experiment, but my lovely, wonderful assistants, Dr. C and his two friends, hopefully demonstrated nicely exactly how the first experiment, the Stroop task, went. And we can use that idea of the Stroop task to talk about and kind of go backwards to the first section. So, as stated in chapter 3, I think it is, maybe it's chapter 2, there are 4 main sections to a manuscript or a paper. And the introduction is actually the first one. The method section, which you guys did, is the second one, but because the method section is so specific and precise, I kind of like to have that one done as a paper first and then come back to this one. I put this in Google Docs because for some reason on my version of this Word document, I don't see the triangle. And as it is, I wonder if I can edit this now. If I can rotate it. Maybe I'm not even going to bother, but oh, here we go. Let's see. Is that going to work? Nope. Doesn't look like it will. Okay. Well, this is supposed to be an upside down triangle because an introduction section goes from very general, which is sort of the wide base, to very specific, which is the point. So it's actually supposed to be an upside down triangle. And hopefully when you guys see the Word version of this one, it shows up. But as I'll show you guys, I took it off. As I would have shown you, the Word version of it just didn't have the graphic at all, as luck would have it. So let's get into how to write an introduction section. So the method section obviously was all about what you did specifically, what materials you used specifically, who the subjects or participants were specifically, and what type of design it was, including statistics. In the introduction section, this is where we're making our background of the field, the background of what was done. So as you can see here, the purpose of an introduction in a psychology paper is to justify the reasons for writing about your topic. Now remember, in the theory data cycle, we start with a theory and then work our way towards a hypothesis, which is a testable prediction of that theory. So how did we come to the topic that we came to? Your goal in this section is to introduce the topic to the reader, provide an overview of the previous research on the topic that's already known, and then kind of what is unknown, which is where you are sort of making your push for your specific experiment. When Stroop first did his experiment, that had never been done before, so there was a background on what had been done from Stroop, as we kind of saw in the slides in my tutorial from last module. And we talked about how cognitive psychology sort of and attention is the main topic. And then specifically, he went to what happens if there's interference. So he went from what's already known, kind of general, getting more specific. And then this is what I'm doing in this current study. So very specific. And then it ends with your own hypothesis or hypotheses. So if we move on down the road here, oh, here's edit. Let's see. I don't really want to do anything with that. Okay, so let's just, nope, I'm just going to save and close. Sorry, trying things as I go. So let's get out of there. Okay, So I'm going to put little points in here, and you can see them on the page with all of this stuff on Canvas. The first thing we do from the upside down triangle, sorry, because you'll see a right side up triangle in the last section, which is sort of the reverse of this. You want to introduce your topic. So like a triangle that's upside down, the introduction section starts very broad with a sentence about just generally what the topic is. And then it gets very specific as you continue through to the specific question that's being asked or tested. So your first task here to start out the introduction section, which basically starts out the paper, is to provide a brief description of our research question. So these are the things that you'd ask yourself. What is the experiment or study attempting to demonstrate? What phenomena are you studying? So you're providing a brief history of your topic and explaining how it relates to your current research. So this is the first paragraph or first few sentences of your introduction section. Very general. For example, if you wanted to ask a specific question or look into research on schizophrenia, which is what I did for my dissertation, then first you want to start out with the broad general topic of schizophrenia just to introduce it. So the first sentence would be something like, schizophrenia affects about 1% of the population. It has three main clusters of symptoms: positive, negative, and cognitive deficits. Then you can continue on and define what those are, but you've just introduced the broad topic of schizophrenia itself. In my apologies for the email beep or chime. In my dissertation itself, I went from talking about schizophrenia overall to talking about the cognitive deficits as I got a little more specific. And then I used a mouse that had one of those genes knocked out. So I was able to test that mouse specifically without the gene. So I went from schizophrenia to studies that were done to specifically cognitive deficits. And then I ended with, I have a mouse model with and without this gene, and we're going to see what happens in a memory test with and without the gene. So if we wanted to use the example of the experiment we did in class, the Stroop effect, well, that's about attention. So you can say something like, start off the paper with, the nature of attention has been one of the central concerns of experimental psychology since its inception, right? That's a good way to start the paper. The first line doesn't talk at all about the effect. All we're talking about is attention or cognitive psychology. If you wanted to, we could probably go down to say, interference in attention. What happens if we get distracted or if our brain is interfered, right? If there's interference in our brain. So the first paragraph is just about introducing the background of the topic in general, not even your specific research within that topic, just the topic itself. One paragraph. Part 2 says summarize previous research. The second task of your introduction is to provide a well-rounded summary of previous research relevant to your topic. So before you begin to write this summary, it is very important to thoroughly research your topic. Some research papers can have up to 50 or 60 references from papers that they've read on the same topic. My dissertation had around 60 or 70. Yeah, let's not get ahead of ourselves. This class, I'm going to try to make it easy on you. You're going to have 3 references. And that way we kind of make it a simplified version of this. So before you begin to write this summary, it is important to thoroughly research your topic. Finding appropriate sources amid thousands of journal articles can be a daunting task. This is why the first week I had you guys just get familiar with the database and look up any psychology paper, so at least you're familiar with the search process. So again, there are a number of steps you can take to simplify your research. For the purposes of this class, because ain't nobody got time for 20, 30, 50 references, you will only need a minimum of 3. Some people like to go a little above and beyond and do 4 or 5. That's fine. Nothing against that. But I only require you to have 3 references, which also means that the way that you write this portion of the introduction is a little bit different from how you would normally see in a manuscript. So let's get to researching your topic. Normally well, really quickly, side note, before we get to researching your topic, normally what you would do is take snippets from different areas of your topic background, and add in what previous research showed. So in this case, if we're going to talk about attention, we would find other papers, from years ago or whenever that talked about attention. And so we already know the basically one line of what they discovered. In yours, so that we can simplify it, what we're going to do is, instead of just doing one line and then a citation for the article that you referenced, we're going to do 3 paragraphs, one for each paper. You're going to have a seed article, which just means the original article from which your new version or your new experiment will be taken from. Kind of like the seed that you plant that grows into a tree. This will be the article that you use to base your new experiment off of, and it grows into what you make it. Now, normally when we're in class, everybody gets to choose their own seed article, and there will still be an exercise where you choose your own article and review it just to get practice. But for the ease of doing this online, because it is no longer a team project, I will provide you with the quote unquote seed article, and you will then change it in a way that you see fit. Don't freak out now, because we don't know what that change entails yet, but I promise we're building on that. Okay, side note over. Back to number 3, researching your topic. Again, this is why we did the first week, first homework assignment. Searching a journal database such as PsycArticles or PsycInfo or even Google Docs to find articles on your subject. Once you've located an article, the easiest thing you can do there, which we didn't practice yet, is looking down at the reference section to locate other studies that are cited in the article. So a lot of times the first few studies that are in the reference section are going to be very relevant to your topic. And so those are a good place to start. As you take notes from your articles and you figure out how to read and digest an article, which can have a lot of big words and big terms and things that you may not necessarily understand first time around, be sure to write down where you found the information. I found it on this website, this database, right? So a simple note detailing the author's name, the journal that it's in, the date of publication. These are very important items, and you can search by these things. It helps you to keep a track of sources and avoid plagiarism. So, getting to that point, to 2 and 3, to that extent, the way that we use citations is, if we cite the name of the author, like here, where it says James, this is William James, if you remember from Psych 1, if you had William James mentioned in Psych 1. William James, so James, and then the year of publication. James, 1890, emphasized the selective aspects of attention and regarded attention as a process of, quote, taking obsession by the mind in clear and vivid form of one out of what seems several simultaneously possible objects or trains of thought. Page 403 in parentheses. Let me finish this paragraph and then I will talk about the citations. Others, such as Moray, 1969, and Posner, 1975, have noted that attention is also a heightened state of arousal and that there appears to be a limited pool of attention available for cognitive processes. This would be a separate paper. This is Posner, just Posner in 1975. This one says Posner and Snyder from 1975, as well as Schifrin and Schneider, 1977, have provided accounts of attention that integrate these aspects of attention and emphasize that attention is intimately tied to learning. So now you're getting a little more specific. You're going from how did we define attention, to that we seem to have a limited pool of attention, to the fact that that attention is intimately tied to learning. So now you're going from this is what attention is. This is that we know that it's not unlimited, and here that it's tied specifically to learning. So you're getting right. You're getting closer to that point at the bottom of the upside down triangle. So here, one thing I wanted to point out is what's different from MLA style, which you guys are mostly used to, is that we never, ever, ever, ever write the name of the article. I know in MLA, it is, you don't mention the authors or anything like that. You write in the article titled or in the paper titled, blah, 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 blah. We don't ever do that. So we either cite a person's name, if we mention their name in the article, if we say an article by Horowitz, an article by Avila, right? An article by Munoz. Then you just, in parentheses next to it, put the year of publication, 2016, right? Or if you don't mention the person's name at all, you can say something like, previous studies on attention have shown that selective aspects are a process of blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of that, you would put James, comma, 1890 in parentheses. So I'll get to that when we go over the reference section as well. So in the text, you're going to, if you use the author's name, James, Munoz, Horowitz, whoever, right? You then, next to their name, put the year of publication. That's all you have to do to cite it in the actual introduction section. We also don't make a habit of quoting unless it's something very specific. Here, they wanted to define what attention was from this paper, so they gave a direct quote. Normally, we just paraphrase, and that's totally acceptable. In fact, it's encouraged. If you are going to quote an actual paper and take an actual quotation from it, verbatim, then you need to add the quotation marks here, like this, and at the end, you cite the page number that it's on. So if you said Horowitz, 2016, in an article talked about the importance of teamwork, quote, and then, teamwork is really important, unquote. Then you would put the page number, page, 123. Here it says more others such as Moray and Posner, and after each name of the author, you write the year of publication. Again, if there was another author, and it said, another aspect of attention is the fact that it comes and goes. And let's say it was Munoz that wrote that. At the end of that sentence, then you'd write Munoz, comma, 2020. So for you guys, it's going to be a little different, but we can also look at starting with interference as the broad topic instead of just attention, or move from one to the other. You can talk about interference or inhibition. These terms have seemed to have been used basically interchangeably or indiscriminately. Has been given a large place in experimental literature. Then we get a little more specific. The difference in time for naming colors and reading color names has been variously explained. Again, I could go into schizophrenia and say, positive symptoms are hallucinations and delusions. Negative symptoms are defined as depression-like symptoms on self-isolation. And the cognitive problems are problems with memory, attention, learning, and so forth. And then I can go into focusing on the cognitive problems in schizophrenia, right? So I'm getting more specific. I go from what it is and what the clusters of symptoms are into one type of symptoms. And then I can go even further to a single gene that is said to be involved with it, right? So all I'm doing is getting more specific towards my own experiment and what I'm doing. This is the stuff up here that's already been done, already been discovered. So we are getting more specific with it. And then you get to put in your basically hypothesis and your experiment. So this has already been seen. Here's where I'm contributing to the literature by proposing something that hasn't been done before, right? So it gets a little more specific to the topic. The difference in time for naming colors and reading color names has been variously explained. Cattell, 1886, and Lund, 1927, have attributed the difference to practice, some sort of practice effect. This reels the topic in from attention to interference, or from interference to specifically looking at color naming. It may also be a good idea to reference Stroop if you were to use this, since he pioneered the task we're using for the study. Then you'd want to talk about how our study is either confirming the original hypothesis or taking it in a slightly different direction. Which brings us to number 4, providing your hypothesis. Once you talk about what's already been done, now you're talking about the new thing that your experiment is doing. So here you might want to provide a little bit of background. You might say, based on the previous studies, attention is blah, blah, blah. In the current study, and that's a good bridge, right? The bridge, as I mentioned on the page, should be about 2 to 4 sentences. Previous studies showed this. The current study showed blank. Apparently, I have low disk space, but I'll get to that later. That's the least of my concerns. Then you provide your hypothesis. Once you've summarized the previous research, you explain areas where the research is lacking or potentially flawed. Basically, where the theory doesn't have stuff. What are you contributing to this topic? What is missing from previous studies on your topic, or what research questions have yet to be answered? This is where your research question would come in, which leads to your hypothesis. Your own hypothesis should lead from these research questions. Well, what happens if we compare a neutral task with an interference task? And boom, we have the Stroop task, right? So your own hypothesis should lead from these questions. At the end of your introduction, offer your hypothesis and describe what you expected to find in your experiment or study. So again, we can turn to an example from a paper that uses the Stroop task. We have talked about the broad, general overall topic of attention or interference. We've gone through the history of attention as far as what has been published. Now we're getting into the specifics of why we chose this topic and what gap in the literature we may be trying to fill in. We can make our own example here for simplicity. The Stroop task shows that different levels of processing, automatic, represented by reading colors of words that have nothing to do with colors, aka the neutral list, versus interference of processing, by reading the color of words that are the names of colors. This can be shown by looking at the interference of naming colors of words that interfere with our normal level of processing, which is just simply to read the words. Based on the previous findings of attention and interference, this is where your bridge comes in. Based on the previous findings of attention and interference, we sought to replicate the findings of Stroop in 1935. So now you're saying that you're basically looking for a replication of what he did originally. We did it in a sort of different manner than Stroop's original task, and that's where the specifics can come in. But you're basically, showing that that's what we're doing. We predict, although I really should change this, and I'm going to do this right now while we're on screen, because I need you to understand that even though when you're writing your paper, you're going to write it in sort of 2 sections. The intro and method section is going to be the first draft, quote unquote, and then you're going to put in the results and discussion later. You're turning in the paper as if you've already done the experiment. And since we can't do an experiment in person with each other, it's all hypothetical anyway. So I just need you guys to know that everything in here, when you write the introduction, it's already been done. Previous research has already been done. Your experiment at this point, when you turn in the full manuscript, has already been done. So you're always going to use past tense. This paper showed that, not shows, and we predicted that, right? So, and considering we already wrote our paper, our method section on the Stroop task, we already performed, quote unquote, performed that experiment, or at least my kid and his friends did. We predicted that reaction times would be longer. So Again, I should change it as we go. We predicted that reaction times would be longer to read the color of the word when the word itself is a color than when the word has nothing to do with a color, which is basically a fancier way of saying we predicted it would take longer to read the I list. I know. The I list than the N list. This takes us from very general to very specific. And so in this case, with only one IV and two levels, you only have one effect. We just call it the effect, right? Or the difference. We have the N list, we have the I list. Our prediction is that it would take longer to read the I list than it did to read the N list. And that's precisely what we found. Now, it would be a really bad example of an experiment if we only use 3 participants, or even the 8 that I talked about in the tutorial. But there we have it, right? So this takes us from general to specific, but one of the things that I mentioned on that page, so you can look at it after you go over this tutorial, which just gives you the sort of bullet points of what I'm looking for in this section. I want to take it a step further because in the next phase of the class and in the third module, next module, we're going to talk about simple experiments with one IV and 2 levels, which we did with the Stroop task, my example of studying versus not studying. One IV, 2 levels, one effect. One group is going to be higher than the other. So there's only one hypothesis here. In this case, the N list should take less time to read than the I list, or you can say that the interference would take longer to read than the neutral list. But to help you with this, and again, I'm providing the overall seed article, but you guys are going to pick a practice seed article to base your experiment on. So in the seed article, and the sample article you'll see next week, or I guess you can access it now if you wanted to, we are looking at more than one IV. So in this case, you're going to have 2 IVs with 2 levels. So if we were to use the Stroop task as an example, I would say, what is another independent variable that we can add to it? And this is where I would get you guys to give me answers. But since I have nobody else but myself, I'm very aware of this low disk space, people. We want to do this, what we call a 2x2 design. And the 2x2 design says 2 variables, 2 independent variables with 2 levels each. So we already have one independent variable, which is wordless. You have interference and you have neutral. So what could we add to this to make another to make another variable? Well, there's a lot of things we can do. One idea is to add a step and see if the spelling of the word causes interference, because a cheating way of doing this Stroop task is if you blur your eyes so you can't really read the word, then all you're looking at is the color,